think when you're young, you idealize like being rich, having money, right? Like, so.
Jenna is widely recognized as the philosophy girl due to her profound insight, curiosity, and intellectual depth. These qualities shaped her identity and set her apart. Like many immigrant families, her parents worked enormously to provide their children with opportunity to succeed in the world. Despite excelling in various aspects of her life, Jenna still faced challenges like her identity in the white world and the insecurity that came along with it. Jenna is studying a double degree, politics, philosophy, economics, and international security studies at Canberra University, the top uni in Australia.
On one end, you think it will be really easy, and then you kind of think, well, like if my parents could do it, I can do it too. And really, I think that comes from a level of privilege. Like we live at least I live around privilege. I am privileged, and I can say that openly that I am. But I think my experience as a person who's grown up in this area and seeing my family and my sister, who's 7 years older than me, be able to be a homeowner, a landowner at the age of 22, 23.
She?
Yeah.
How come?
I think that's because she stayed home and she didn't have to pay rent. She went to uni. My parents paid for everything. And she could just save her salary, and as a result she had enough money to pay a deposit. I think when you come from a level of privilege, you see that you don't have to follow the kind of rules and regulations that are set on you by the financial kind of like you don't have to go through I have to have X amount of money to then invest in a house. You have the kind of you're taught this mindset that you make loopholes, and if you have the X amount of money for a deposit, then you can get this amount of money as a loan from the bank and this amount of money as a loan from your parents, and then pay it all off, and that's how you do it, right? And so I think a lot of people around me have the same kind of upbringing, that it's like you have your parents' backing, you've been brought up in a privileged environment where almost everyone is a homeowner, and so you're not really out of the bubble, you're not outside of the bubble, so you kind of deal with the optimism. Another thing is it's all about mindset. So it's like if you think you're privileged and if you've been brought up in that it's easy, it can happen, it's almost as if it's not a hurdle for you, it's not so far away. So I don't know.
So what does your sister do for living?
She's jumped around a bit. She now she's moved out. She's in Canberra. She's working at DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So and then before that she was an architect. So
wow, big change.
Yes, big change.
So how did she get a job over there in Department of Affairs?
Well, she did a lot of civic work. So she did a lot of charitable work, and she made a lot of connections, and then from there she realized she's really into foreign affairs, as I am, and then through that then she did, and she's she's not on a great salary, but I think that's the thing. It's not that you have to be on a great salary, it's that you're surrounded by people who are saying it's easy, because that's all we know, and as a result it kind of is bolstered by this idea of, okay, my friends, my family can do it. I can find loopholes around the system and find a way to get into the market. And I think that's why we're so optimistic, as I don't know if it's my generation. I, on the other hand, am a bit iffy. I don't know if I will be able to be a homeowner.
Really?
But I hope I can.
But how come you seeing your sister being successful like that?
Yeah.
How come you're not feeling optimistic?
Because I want to work in the public sector, and she does work in the public sector now, but You don't get paid crazy amounts of money in the public sector. Unless I start a business and I hustle, which I don't know if I really would enjoy that at all. I don't think until I'm very old I will be able to afford that. Otherwise, unless I'm highly successful and I'm someone who's at the top, which again, I would have to think about where my life stage is at and if I want to be at that point at whatever time.
Wow.
That's how I'll be figuring it out.
Okay.
Yeah. But also on top of that, just from what you just said, I just realized also, just looking at it from the migrant lens as well. My parents were first migrants. My dad came when he was 21. My mum came when she was here when she was 12. So my mum had education here, but my dad had just lost his father, and his mum couldn't afford to, pay. So he was living in poverty pretty much, hopping around trying to get a tertiary education, which is great. And I think those stories and the fact that my parents, even though it's a different context completely because financially and economically it's so different, kind of hearing those stories has kind of bolstered within us that, okay, if they can do it with nothing and I've been given everything, then there is some sense of, okay, if I want it, I can do it. And I think that's where my kind of, from the lens, not from living in a white society, but from my lens as a child of an immigrant, that also comes into play. But then on top of that, you also have cultural factors as well. I know that in my culture, being successful, whatever successful means, right? That's like, it's necessary, it's needed, it's how you make your parents proud, and it's how you give back, right? So yeah. So I'm Jenna. I just finished year 12 and I am going into uni in a month and I'm moving to Canberra soon. That's my story. That's who I am. I'm Jenna.
How was your ETA?
It was good. I got a 92.3.
Wow.
I could have done better, but I didn't do bad, so I'm happy with what I got.
You get into what you want to study. What are you going to study?
I'm doing a double degree in politics, philosophy, economics, and international security studies at ANU. Yeah.
Your parents must be quite proud.
They're excited.
Does that mean you might move into with your sister?
I'm moving by myself, so I'm moving onto campus. So I have to pay my own rent and stuff. Yeah.
How are you going to pay your rent?
I'm working, but also I have a little bit of support from my parents. But most of it I'm going to be working and paying myself. Yeah. Okay. Well, where do I start? I love reading. I'm called a nerd by a lot of people, which I'll take. It's funny. I love talking to people, learning about cultures, talking about philosophy. I love learning about philosophy, art, literature. I like to take as much as I can from life, all different aspects of life, and live it. I like thinking about the world in different perspectives, and I like learning about different perspectives. I also just like having fun and doing nothing. I'm just like another teenage girl, I like having good friends that I can connect with. That might be like a smaller group of people, but I like having good, solid relationships in my life. And I think also I kind of try to push negativity out of my life, and I preach living with kindness, so I like to be kind to everyone. Yeah.
Who are your solid friends at the moment?
Who are my solid friends at the moment? I have a little group of friends, a few girls, Ashlyn, people that kind of have the same morals and values as me. Serena, Samantha, my boyfriend's friends, you know, like, but my solid group of girls, that's who I love, yeah.
Tell us a bit of your family.
My family? My sister is 7 years older than me. She's like one of my best friends. Yeah, we're very close. And then my mum and my dad. My dad's a very smart man. He's a very smart man. He loves history and he loves talking about all things, you know, intellectual. And my mum, she's just the most caring, loving person. And I really love and I'm grateful for my family.
Where are they from and where they work in Australia?
So my parents are from Pakistan. My dad arrived when he was 21. He had just lost his father. Actually, no, he hadn't lost his father. He came and he didn't know that his father had passed away.
So what happened?
He had, my grandpa, he had cancer. And my grandma, she was only 45 when he passed away. She wanted my dad to move overseas and get a tertiary education. And he did do that, but she didn't tell him that he passed away because he would have come back to Pakistan and he would have never left. So he found out 2 weeks later that his father had passed away. And I think that stayed with him for a very long time. And it trickled into all his other relationships too. My mum, she moved here when she was, I think, 12 or 13. She finished her schooling in Canberra. And she then moved to Sydney and went to Sydney Uni. And she's always been really into science and always wanted her two daughters to become doctors or scientists, and we both, me and my sister, went into humanities. So we laugh about that, but yeah, she's a lovely human, and yeah.
What do they do for a living?
So this kind of makes me sad because I think both of them just chose what they wanted to do, what would make them the most money, because coming from immigrant background they had nothing. But it's not something that they enjoyed. So my dad is a senior change manager and he contracts, he does different things. He worked in like firms, like consulting firms, but he didn't really like that. So he's moved to government and he contracts with government. And my mum works at Optus as a program manager. So yeah, I think they forewent, you know, doing things that they're passionate about to make and live a good life with their family, which kind of makes me sad. But they always just made sure that we would pursue things that we were passionate about. So I think what they learnt in their life trickled down into our life now. Yeah.
What did your father study?
He studied IT and computer science, I think.
And your mom?
My mum, she studied, I can't remember exactly, it was something sciencey, like a biomedical sciences or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're all like quite highly educated.
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Yeah. I think education is highly valued in our family, in my immediate family at least.
What kind of influence your parents have on you?
They have many influences. I think, like, you can talk about the styles in which they give love, or their kind of educational kind of patterns. But one thing I know that has influenced my life, and it's a small thing, but it's like every night we have sit-down dinners, and at those sit-down dinners we have the most intellectual conversations about where we come from, about the state of politics in Australia, the economy, history, And I think that influenced what I enjoy. And what I enjoy is learning about other people's perspectives and having those conversations that broaden your horizons. So I think my parents, especially my dad, influenced me in that way. And my mum, I think she influenced me ethically. She kind of set me on this path of like always drilling into me that you need to be kind to people. I always thought like, why do we need to be kind to everyone? And what I realized is there's not that much kindness in the world. So if you can be kind to someone and just show them grace, that's so important. And that's really important to me because my mom drilled that into me from when I was very little. And I think she influences me in that way.
Are they ambitious for you?
They are. I think they say they don't put pressure on me, and I know they love me, but they think I'm gonna do very well in life. I think and that's a bit of pressure, but they're very ambitious. They think I'm gonna do very good things, and they are very ambitious. Yeah.
What are your feelings towards your parents now?
I'm very grateful for them. I think I'm really grateful for them, and I empathize with them a lot. But I also we grew up in different cultures, so the way they show love may not be the way that I want to receive love sometimes. And
can you give an example?
My dad can be emotionally detached sometimes, and I'm a very emotional person, and I come from like Australian culture where we joke around, we're very laid back, and my dad's very stressed and he's very like uptight, and so in those ways we have some misunderstandings sometimes. But all in all, like I've always been taught to, and I think this comes from the immigrant perspective again, but respect my family and respect all that they've done for me, and so I do.
Okay.
We do have different like styles of like giving love and receiving love, but I think overall we see each other as like we respect each other and we grow together, and I think that's what's important, that they want to grow with me and I want to grow with them.
So you have a very close relationship with them?
Yeah, I think that's another thing. My family, they want to be close and they want to be in each other's lives, and some people might not be okay with that, but I'm quite okay with my family being a part of my life as long as they're respectful and I'm respecting them and there's no harm done. It's great having a support system like that. Yeah.
Do you have a large extended family?
I do. We're not as close with them. We're still close, but we kind of have different views to them. In the nicest way possible though. Like we just are very different because I think they are more traditional, whereas we are more, let's do what we want to do and let's not stick to the status quo. And I think that's another thing I've been taught by my family is don't stick to the status quo if it hinders what you want to achieve and what you want to do in life.
Okay. Now, tell us about your ambition.
My ambition. Do I want to use the word ambition? I don't know. Because sometimes I think about the word ambition. And
what would you like to achieve in this life?
What would I want to achieve in this life? I think I want to, my whole rhetoric, my whole entire life has been to make an impact, to make a change, to shift something that's harming people. I don't know exactly what that is at the moment, but I want to make a social impact in this world. But I want to do it through education. I want to educate myself, and then I want to see what is the issue that I'm most passionate about, and then work on it for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Funny how when I'm talking to some boys, you know what they say? They phrase is usually like, I want to be known, like I want my name to remember, but you never use that phrase. So I find and some boys, they really, I don't want to say egoistic, but it's about them to make it, you know. But why do you think? No, never mind. We're gonna talk about this later on in a different topic. Okay. What does success mean to you?
I don't think I figured that out. I think sometimes when, especially like even like last year when I was just even a year younger, I thought success is they're gonna, like, people are gonna know that I've done good things in the world, and that my success is going to be that I've achieved something. But I think that it's so fluid. Success is so fluid, right? And what I've learned in this past year is that life is not linear. Like, you can do something and progress forward, and then you can take 4 steps back. I might be 60 and I might have met every goal in life that I have, and I might still not be successful because, you know, I don't feel successful. But then, you know, at 54, I might have met half the goals that I wanted to and feel very successful because at that time, at that moment, I feel successful. So success to me is this very fluid thing, you know, because goals are always changing. Humans are bound to change, and my life isn't linear. I will take 5 steps forward, I will take 6 steps back, you know. And so, yeah, that's my...
Okay, that's great. What other obstacles do you have now?
Obstacles? I think maybe I'm a bit self-critical sometimes, and within that I think I hinder myself from achieving things that I want to achieve. Like, in the moment, like, I might feel like I'm not doing enough, I'm not being enough, I'm not good enough, and that will make me retreat instead of just go for it, you know. Yeah.
Do you think it's something to do with the fact that our gender played a bit of role as well, and because the fact that we're living in a patriarchal society where it was constricted, and boys are really encouraged to be, you know, up there and loud and express themselves, but for girls there's more criticism of them?
Yeah, no, I think it very much stems from, I think, personal stuff, but also gender plays such a big role in it. I think from the very beginning women are socialized to not take steps. They're socialized to second guess themselves, to be small, to take up less space. I read this statistic the other day, and it said, you know how when you apply for a job they have like a list of things, males will only reach half of the things that the criteria for the job, and they will apply, and women will meet the whole criteria and still not apply because they're not good, they don't think they're good enough. And this happens so much. We're told to not take up room, we're told to not make space, not be loud. We're labelled by the media, we're labelled by society, we're labelled by the systems that we live in, the capitalist system that we live in, you know. We're labelled by so much that if we are confident, you know, like, that's looked down upon. And in doing so, we've kind of been fed this rhetoric that you are not good enough, you know. And I think men have been told to take up room, and they're admired when they are loud. And you can clearly see that through, like, Julia Gillard. People called her a witch and a bitch, and said that she was playing the gender card when she talked about misogyny. And Tony Abbott, her opponent, when he talked about misogyny, he was praised. So it's, even though he objectively could be known as a misogynist himself.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting to see the kind of gender dynamics that are in society that then trickle down into the grassroots level of kids who then get older, and then the cycle perpetuates. So yeah, because it's almost as if the world profits off of female insecurity, and they do. Everything that we do as females to look good, to fit in, it comes at a cost. You know, they profit, whoever they is, you could say, profits off of female insecurity, and that's why female insecurity is perpetuated throughout history, you know. It's just saddening to see that there's such a big disparity though, because, you know, we don't want men to come down from their high horse. Like, it's great, you know, you be confident, you know, as long as you're not harming anyone. We want to see women becoming confident and not being labelled as whatever labels, he's the dude's whipped because the girl is so confident that she will tell him when he's done something wrong, or, you know, those labels, those weird kind of labels that are out there in society. Like, if you are confident, if you love yourself, there's like this self-care rhetoric, but then also you will be labelled in some way. So it's interesting.
What was your childhood like?
That's a broad question.
Did you have a good childhood?
I had a great childhood.
Tell me about the activities you did and people you met. And did you like the music, art?
Yeah.
What sort of activities were you involved?
Well, my mum and I used to do a lot of like fun activities. We used to go to the library. She used to take me to the library, and my aunt used to take me to the library. And I know it sounds like the nerdiest thing ever, but I didn't even read the books back then. I just loved the atmosphere of the library. So we would go and we would sit there, and we would sit in the children's corner and sit with our books, and my mum would let me and my cousins borrow three books each, and then we would all sleep over and read these books, and then go to the library the next day and give them back to Pennant Hills Library, and then go to the park there. And that was a really good time. Like, that was one of my favorite memories. And then I was just like another little kid. Like, I was very loud and outgoing and confident. I loved sports, and
What did you do?
I swam a lot, and I danced. I did lots of dancing, lots of swimming, lots of rugby and Oz tag and touch. My sister wasn't sporty, but I was very sporty. I was always outside. I was always outside in the backyard, like doing random stuff on the trampoline. Like, my mind was very curious all the time. It didn't matter what it was doing, and I kind of forget sometimes that, you know, that childhood wonder, it's like one of the best feelings when you think about it nostalgically, because it wasn't pressure of the world, but you just could enjoy those singular moments. And maybe that's something I need to bring back into my life, enjoying the singular moments. But yeah.
Read Proust.
Yes. We read about him in Extension.
Oh,
yeah.
No fucking way.
Yeah, we did.
Who was the teacher?
Mr. Lees.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that man.
He's really
great.
cool.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you did it first. Fantastic. We're only focusing on English, American, Canada,
Yeah.
and just
Well,
Anglo-Saxon.
you should sit in an Extension 1 class with Mr. Lees. We studied Dostoevsky.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
we did that. We did, like, I think Russian literature is really interesting.
It's great.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people in general aren't curious about the world in Australia, and I think that's because we are sheltered.
Yeah.
Like,
Correct.
we are sheltered from a lot of things. We have so much privilege, and we have the privilege to not think about it, push it out of our brains. You know, we have healthcare that makes us prolong our lives so much greater than other life expectancies in the world, that we don't have to think about death until we're 60, you know, and then I still have 20 years until I die. Let me start thinking about death now and what the world means. You know, we have education, which means that we can get good jobs, and we don't have to think about you know, what's going on. We have women's rights, which means that, you know, we don't have to go and protest anymore. And yes, I'm not saying that we're perfect. I'm just saying that compared to women in Afghanistan, we have lots of privileges, you know. Just recently, their education got taken away. They're not allowed to go to uni anymore, women in Afghanistan. And, you know, we don't have to think about those things. We don't have to deliberate on whether that's ethical or unethical, because we don't have that. We're sheltered. We're very lucky, yeah.
Okay. Do your parents own property?
Yes, they do. Yeah. They own the one here, one in where I live, and then they own a few investment properties as well. Yeah. Yes.
You're doing well. Congratulations.
Yes. Good on them.
Yeah.
They're very.
Wow.
They worked hard. So yeah.
Okay. Do you think your parents could have afforded send you to private school?
They could have if they wanted to. Would have been maybe a little bit of a stretch, just a little bit. But definitely my parents could have. It was just like if they wanted to.
Why didn't they?
Well, I think firstly it's just a lot easier. Public education is just as good as private education. Okay, maybe a little bit less, but you know, like, you know, they saw that, you know, my cousins, they did well at public schools, and so we could do well at public schools. But also they kind of saw some of the attitude, like some of the, not attitude in a bad sense, but some of the demeanors of people who came from private schools, and they didn't particularly resonate with that, so they wanted to send their children to a public school. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think they have much better chance to be successful in the society?
They have a better chance of being successful in the HSC. But then I've read many an article and many a statistic that states that public school pupils do much better in university than their private school counterparts.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Much better.
Much better. Yes.
Unbelievable.
And that's because public schools teaching styles resonate with how universities teach. That's by, okay, the onus is on you. It's your life. You have to do it, right? And private schools are like, you have to study this amount of time, and you have to do this, and you have to do this, and we're going to give you all these resources. And it's, I don't want to say such a jarring word as spoon feeding, but it's something close to it.
Okay.
And as a result, I think that being successful isn't like, yes, you get so many connections from private schools, but I think it's more than that for private people who send their children to private schools. Parents get connections. So in that regard, like, you could go to a public school, have kids, and send them to a private school, and then because your kids go to a private school and you get connections from your kids, you could be successful in that way. So I mean, like, you know, private schools are an institution in a whole education system, and public schools are also really great in their own regards. You probably will have a proportionate kind of skewing of results in the HSC as a result of resource allocation. But I think overall in life, you're not going to be any less successful because you go to a public school. You will be less successful if you don't get the right nurturing and education from a young age, and I think that's a whole bunch of different factors: parents, family, socioeconomic status, schooling. Yeah. Okay. In your generation, I think social mobility is still achievable because we're not at that point we're not a society that's so unequal that social mobility can't occur. It's harder. It's much harder now than it would be.
But it still exists.
But it's still achievable. Yeah. And that might be me being naive. But I believe that social mobility is still achievable. It's harder for people who are lowest class to come into the middle class and higher class. than for middle class people to go into the upper class.
So you think that from middle class status to jumping into the upper middle class is easier?
Yes.
It is possible?
Yes.
Okay. They drink up $100 on a beer and pocket machine and yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a harsh reality that at public schools you get the people who you get a whole different range of people, right? You get people who are very intellectual, and then you can get people who unfortunately are almost illiterate because of, you know, their circumstances. I think in the middle of that there is like this complacency, especially that I saw at Penno. Lots of people who, again, had the potential, they couldn't really achieve it because they weren't really forced to do it. But I also think it's not just the schooling that influences that, it's the values that the parents have. And I'm not saying that these values are good or bad. And some people might be really content living their life that way, and I fully respect that. But like my parents' values were, you know, that you gotta push, you gotta work hard, you really gotta do it. And maybe that's not even the best way to look at it. But like other people's values were, you know, like you do whatever you wanna do, like, and if you want to pursue school, you pursue school. If you want to be a tradie, you be a tradie. It's whether you want to move up in the social classes that really is the question. Social mobility, I think it's really interesting to think about, because when you think about it from a normative kind of point of view, it's like, okay, everyone wants to move up in the classes, everyone wants to be rich, right? But some people are really content living a middle class life. Obviously, a low socioeconomic experience, they wouldn't feel comfortable living in life, so they would want to move up into the middle class. But middle class people are still somewhat comfortable, right? So there's not that urge of survival to push them up. And because a lot of Australia is quite, at least like from what I know, is like middle class, and then there's the real poor, and then there's the real rich. A lot of Australia is in that kind of middle bracket. I think it's kind of different than if you were to talk about like a developing nation or something where everyone wants to push and climb the social ladder. Does the majority of Australia even want to climb the social ladder? That is a question in itself, you know? Yeah. I think money and class are two different things in my mind.
Oh, okay.
I think class is a lot more than just the $3 million that you have, $300 million that you have. Class is, do you adhere to the social kind of norms within that class? Do you want to be a part of the whirlwinds that come with being in that class or that class or that class, you know? And when you like, you know, think about that and, you know, like say, okay, I have $300 million, is that going to fit with like the social class? Like sometimes I say, oh, I would love to be rich so I could buy a house by the beach, and then I'm like, but do I want to deal with all the like rich, like, you know, the things that come with being rich, you know, like in terms of, do I want to deal with like going to galas and doing this and talking to other rich people and having to look at their point of view, which would be very different to my point of view in life. And that like those like, it's not, class isn't just about the money that you have. Class is about the social characteristics that you also have. And I think that's that's how I see class. Yeah. And so in that sense, like, you know, someone might have $300 million and climb up in terms of like quality of life, but are they adhering to the class systems, or is class, the way we see it, going to change in the future as a result of people, you know, trying to climb up socially? I don't know if I'm very much like saying this in the right way.
From social perspective, she's doing something quite prominent and important job in the society, like, you know, for the government as well. So maybe it's also more than just middle class, because of nature of her job gave her different resources, like you say, she's encountering everyday life as well. Like she will be hang out with someone who's, I don't know, working for the government high up.
Yeah, exactly.
She access to all those resources.
Yeah. And I think like the types of people she would probably interact with and stuff would be there, and that would probably like, you know, she would then have the social standing, plus then one day might be making the same amount of money, and there you go, that's class. Maybe that pairing of the two. I think the HSC really brought it out because lots of people look down at Penno. They're like, oh, Penno. There's like almost an elitism that comes from like hearing about a public school and not in the top 130, you know. I mean, like I was friends with a lot of people from selective schools, and I would study with them, and they were so like high and mighty about their things, you know. And a lot of them came from good homes. They lived in, you know, great suburbs. They had, you know, lots of money, and they could afford to send their children to tutoring and to private schools. And then you had like people from Barker who, like, I knew some people from like private schools, and they weren't that great when, like, they weren't that smart, but they beat me like in the ATAR because they, you know, they had the resources. And I'm not saying that I didn't have the resources. I'm very grateful for Penno, but you know, they had some great resources, right? And so it's just really interesting, like, that I saw this like real big disparity through the HSC of you know, private schools versus public schools. And that's why I say, sure, you might not be unsuccessful in life when you're at a public school, but private school people will do better than you compared to your level, like, you know, comparatively, in the HSC, in the system, you know. I think they benefit greatly from the system that we have here today, and I don't want to go too deep into that because I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but like, you know, I think that the HSC in itself is a very inequitable system. So yeah.
How does it make you feel?
It made me feel really sad, but not for myself, because I'm not directly impacted that much. I have a great family. They can, you know, afford to send me to tutoring. But some of the people who are closest to me struggled through the HSE, and because they didn't have the right resources. I mean, I'm grateful for Penno, but Penno really nurtured me because I adhered to the school system, the way my mind worked, the way I worked, you know, the way I was. But there was some people at Penno who could have done amazing, and they will do amazing in life, but the school system told them that they didn't. And I feel bad for them, because if I felt so, like, if I felt the disparity so greatly, imagine how these people are feeling, and imagine how they felt at this school.
Can you give an example of these examples that you mentioned?
I don't want to like say anyone's names,
okay.
Because they,
it's okay, yeah, don't worry.
But yeah, like some of my closest friends, they had like rough home lives. They have learning disabilities. You know, they have like, you know, they can't afford to send their children to tutoring, you know, to supplement their learning at Pennant Hills High School, because you know, we don't really have pastoral care at our school either. And so these people, like, if I felt the disparity of, you know, the resources that private schools were getting compared to me, imagine how these people felt who were not getting as much support as I was from Penno UP, because I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything, but I was academically up there. I was also a leader at the school, and the teachers liked me. But that's because I know how to interact with people socially. But some people, they don't have the same social kind of like IQ that I have, and academically they might have felt like they weren't the smartest because the school system didn't really nurture the way that their brain thought, and so Penno nurtured me, but that's public schools. They nurture you if you adhere to the school system, whereas private schools, they kind of not nurtured, but they spoon feed every student that they can. And so if my friends who were struggling through the HSC felt that disparity, I felt horrible that that's kind of the reality that we live in. I lived kind of through that, and I felt sad about it. So imagine how much harder it would have been for those people.
How about the class difference that you have experienced that encountering with people from private school? Not system, but people.
At parties that I go to, sometimes it's very different in that they're kind of, it's almost as if private school people like other private school people. But they don't, I'm not too sure how they I know that I do feel kind of weird, sometimes. There was one private school party that I went to, and I met a girl, and she was lovely, but they stick to their own cliques and their own groups. And I also swam a lot, and I swam with lots of private school kids because it's an expensive sport. And just hearing the stories that they had, the amount of money they spent, and I don't want to say a bratty attitude, but there was kind of a very different attitude than...
Tell me the story that you heard.
Doing drugs. It was people at Penno do drugs. Lots of people at Penno do drugs. But these people would buy expensive amounts of drugs, do it, get in trouble, and their schools would kind of hide it all for them and give them in-school suspensions for this. What's an in-school suspension? I have no clue. But it was to hide the fact that they did that, and to keep the face clean, and so.
What about the people who's worse off than you in a different suburb or different country even? Have you visited Pakistan?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so when you see the difference between different country or your own hometown and also a different suburb, have you lived or visited a different suburb?
Yes. So when I went to Pakistan, it was my first time ever going in 2019. In 2019,
Okay.
and I drove past kids doing school on the side of the road. And my great grandma, she started a school for girls there, where they do a funding program to get lower socioeconomic girls to then go to school and become nurses and doctors. And so I went to that school where my grandma started. I went and saw it, and these girls, they came from such rough backgrounds, and it was just really eye-opening to me that I live in a bubble myself, and I'm very privileged. Yeah.
How do you think we're ever gonna close the gap between such a disparities that you mentioned?
I don't know if you can. I want to be the most optimistic person, and I want to say I want to work towards closing these disparities. It's my life's goal to work on something like this, but I'm not too sure if it's possible. The extent, the scale at which these disparities exist. it looks like it's really impossible. And also, when you think about it, it's so complex. Can you really close the gap? Do people, like if I look at it from my Western point of view and I'm looking at it towards like the Pakistani worldview, me as like a Westerner coming in and trying to close some inequality gap, like I'm not white, but it's a white savior complex, like I'm coming in and I'm making their life better. No, I don't want to do that. I want to, it's like you have to think do I want to, is it most beneficial to close the gap, in these disparities? The systems that we have in place, they're so complex. It's just very interesting. I don't know. Yeah.
So let's not looking through the Pakistan for a while. Okay? Ignore it; they're not there. Let's only looking into what happened in Australia.
Yes.
Okay, the class system within Australia.
I think we need to fund public education. We need to fund public education and really boost, really invest in infrastructure, like new schooling, new resources, and budgeting for that. But that then becomes very political, right? That then goes to this whole idea of okay, how much funding are private schools getting? Is that funding compared to public school funding equal and equitable? If it's not, whose vested interest is there? That is choosing this funding, the amount of funding that schools get. Is that part of a corrupt system that we're a political system that has parts that have corruption? It's just things like that. I think it's much more complex than just we can do one thing and it will close the gap or make it better or make it worse.
What about any racial difference you have experienced?
Oh,
in Australia?
So much.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. About your experience.
I've tried to make myself white. I've whitewashed myself for the longest time, and I'm just learning to embrace my culture. And that's because I grew up in a white, for the longest time I thought I was disgusting because I was brown. I grew up at a white primary school where you were laughed at for your features. In high school, I was laughed at for my features. I was never told anyone about my heritage, my roots, my religious kind of roots, anything, because I was different. I was so different. And I had no kind of, I'd never thought of myself as normal, and I was ashamed of who I was because it was an underlying racism. It wasn't racism on the surface. It was more just white mums would make connections with white mums and they would have friends through that, and my mum was brown. She worked. She didn't get to stay home with how in primary school a lot of other white mums got to stay home and stuff like that. And there was a lot of for me, I felt a lot of not discrimination, but I felt outcasted because I lived in such a white area, and sometimes it's just about representation. It's just about feeling like you're normal too. And I didn't know who I was for the longest time because I was too brown to be white in where I lived, and then I was too white to be brown because of my culture and where I grew up. I grew up in a white culture, but then I was brown. So my family would say, "Oh, she's so white, she doesn't know anything." And then, at school, I was a brown girl, and even at Penno now, me and Serena, Serena's also brown and she was in our grade. We were talking about this the other day and we were I think there's one other brown girl in my grade, and there's a few Asian girls, one or two. Amanda, I think, is the only full Asian girl. and then Samantha's there's a few half Asians as well, but like a handful of girls, right? And so it was just really interesting how we all kind of had like similar experiences of thinking we were not good enough, and that like people would get our names mixed up. It was almost as if we didn't have our own identities because we were brown, or like me and Serena's names got mixed up so much, and we don't even look that like similar. We're different types of browns, and you know, what else was there? Yeah, but like getting called different names. The other, like when I was in year 11, there was like a brown girl in year 7, and everyone was like, oh look, that's mini Jenna, because she was just the other brown girl. Like it's like little things, like it's like sensationalizing the people of color because there's no people of color, and it's just the fact that there's no like diversity that kind of is a little bit detrimental to your own development as a person of color when you're living in a white society.
Yeah,
I think it was more like, you know, for me, I never mixed white people up because I was born and bred here. Like, you know, these are my peers, but you know, they had their identity, and I was known as one of the brown girls, you know, and that was kind of sensationalized a little bit because they used to mix us up because we were both brown. So where's my individual identity as Jenna, you know, like as a human, you know, when I know everyone's face and I know what they look like, and even though they're all the same ethnicity, I still know everyone's name, and I'm like, you know, like it might be a stretch for some people, but I think like me and Serena, we bonded over the experience that happened, and that was, yeah. And I get that, like me being someone who was born here and raised around white people, I get intimidated sometimes. It's an intimidating place, like it's scary to show your culture. I intentionally whitewashed myself because it was scary, because I would get laughed at, or you know, I've heard remarks of, oh, she smells, or this or that, you know, about other people of color. So I was like, oh, I need to do this to myself, I need to make myself white, and it's so scary. So I completely understand that where they're coming from when they come in and they see people like this. It's not that they're bad people, like all my friends are white, but you know, it can be intimidating. Yeah, so I understand where they come from, but then on the other hand, yeah, maybe we should make it a more accepting and more like, I don't know, it's a hard thing. Cultural kind of like things is very hard because on one hand, you know, there's like racism, but then there's just like, you know, own prejudice, and there's a lot, like, I think that comes along with it, yeah. The little things about that, like the discomfort, that's like, how come they can feel comfortable? How come I can't feel comfortable? And that's like a bit like that's the thing, right? Like they're allowed to feel comfortable, but I can't feel comfortable. And that's the disparity then, right? Like if you're living your life in Australia, you have every right to be as comfortable as they do.
But I can't.
Yeah.
I couldn't for somehow.
Yeah.